Hey, LinkedIn, and welcome to Business Unusual. This is a live show where we talk about the changing nature of work. I'm Susie Jackson. I'm a news editor at LinkedIn. It is September 9th, and here is a quick look at some of the top stories professionals are talking about today. Drug makers are vowing to vet COVID vaccines. Big pharma companies are pledging not to rush anything to market until it's been proven safe and effective in large clinical trials. 9 companies, including Pfizer and AstraZeneca, have signed on. AstraZeneca also pausing its trials to investigate why one participant had an adverse reaction. The Oscars are announcing diversity requirements for Best Picture nominees. The inclusion criteria comes on both sides of the camera and will go into effect in 2024. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has come under fire in recent years for lack of diversity in its nominees. For more stories like these, check out the LinkedIn News module to the right of your newsfeed if you're on your desktop, or if you're on mobile by clicking into the search box. Staying on the topic of movies, we have been polling professionals on the LinkedIn News page, and we want to hear from you too. We're asking today, with movie theaters reopening in some regions, we want to know whether you plan to return to watching movies in that way, or if you're going to stick to streaming from your couch. We're going to check in on results at the end of the show. So let us know what you think by dropping your answers into the comments today. You could tell us you prefer the big screen, you're going to stick to streaming on the couch, or if it depends, tell us why. We're going to get to those comments and questions throughout the show. And that brings us to our main story today. Staying on entertainment, the pandemic has changed the way and the amount of media that people are consuming. So we want to know, what does that changing landscape mean for content creators? Will we see a return to the way things were? To talk more about where the industry is going, I want to welcome Ty Randolph to the show. Ty is the EVP and GM at Kevin Hart's multi-platform comedy network, Laugh Out Loud. And Ty, you're also the co-founder at Sugarberry, a media company for brown moms. Welcome to Business Unusual.
Thanks, Susie, for having me. So excited to be here.
Let's start off by talking about production. COVID saw everything locked down, from our daily office lives and commutes, right down to the Hollywood production and the sets that are responsible for creating all this content. How are productions ramping back up now?
Cautiously and slowly. I think we've been particularly fortunate because we have our own production facility. So we have 40,000 square foot facility out in the valley, but it's a completely different landscape in terms of what that looks like and all of the risk associated for all parties involved. So we're trying to meet demand, and we're slowly and cautiously ramping back up. But I have to say, I feel like our head of content and production, shout out to Candace Wilson, has almost become sort of an expert in sort of health and safety protocols too. So the time that it takes to produce, the cost, sort of the what it takes to prepare for that, and also even sort of the structure and sort of the length of the days, the number of folks on set. There's so many different variables, to getting content made right now. So it's restarting, but cautiously. Yeah.
Caution is a good thing to have in abundance right now. Certainly, there's no playbook for this. We're all figuring this out as we go together. You're talking about it's taking more time to do this, right? Or we hope it's the right way to do it. Right. An abundance of caution. It takes time, safety, health precautions. All of that time costs money, right? That's a Hollywood saying. Time costs money, something like that. What does that mean for the industry in terms of what's getting greenlit? Are more things coming into production because we've had this drought, or is it actually harder to ramp back up to the level that you'd like to see?
It's a combination. I don't know that there's been any time in the history of media and in Hollywood where, professionals on every side of the camera, whether you're talent or you're a production company or you're a distribution company, and at Laugh Out Loud, we play across all those spaces. I don't know if we've ever had such a dynamic set of variables. So if you just think about the information that on the green light side, we're having to consider. So, Nielsen studies show that global media consumption is up 60%, right? As a result of the pandemic and everyone being stuck at home. Where is that consumption happening? Well, it's happening across devices, study shows. So it's, not just, so mobile consumption is still holding strong, but you're finding folks, sort of like leaning back for that experience. And so wanting all types of media across all devices. And in our case, where our distribution is heavily ad supported on the LOL network side, when we're not selling to third parties to the LL Studio side, advertise, even though consumption is up, advertising investments across the board, across the industry are down. But you add to that a really interesting insight that many advertisers are saying, because folks aren't out of home as much, and opportunities like experiential just aren't as possible. They're moving the investments that they do have to digital. So when you're sitting in a space like we are, it becomes, what do you do with all of that information? And for us, that and add to that, with sort of the streaming wars, sort of reaching a fever pitch now, it's an incredibly dynamic and competitive marketplace for content. So I see what we're witnessing sort of internally and with our partners is this sort of dynamic expanding and retraction, right? So there's definitely a demand for content if you can get it made. When you think about how folks, third parties who are acquiring content from us are pricing that content, it's cautiously, right? Because while subscription services in many places are holding steady, like I said, with advertising being down, I think there are a dynamic set of elements that are changing day to day. And so whereas many of us had very specific kind of green light philosophies, I think that we're finding that all of those have to be a lot more flexible right now.
Yeah, flexibility, also huge topic right now. I just want to say hello to some of the members joining us in the stream for a moment. We have Clem from Canada, Marion from Virginia, Eric from LA, maybe out on the West Coast with you, Dolores from Texas, and Kevin from New York City. Thank you for joining Business Unusual today. I'm talking with Ty Randolph. She's the EVP and GM at Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud network. Ty, you were just talking to us about consumptions being up, citing some Nielsen statistics there. Ads are down, though. The streaming wars are hotter than ever. Earlier today, Netflix co-CEO Reed Hastings spoke with LinkedIn's editor-in-chief, and he talked about that the future for Netflix was interactive storytelling, that they're trying to develop content around that. I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on that side of it? Has LOL Network explored that? Or if not, what do you think the next big thing is?
100%. So there are a couple of places, and at the beginning of when we started thinking about what Laugh Out Loud would become, and as we've been planning strategically, our philosophy is comedy and color whenever, wherever our audience wants to consume. And for us, as challenging as the pandemic has been, because our approach has been so audience centric versus sort of platform or channel specific, it's helped a lot. So we've sat back and thought, not just what is our audience doing right now, but what are they going to want to do in the future? And so in the way that our divisions are set up, we have Laugh Out Loud Studios where we produce and develop content. We have LOLX, which is our experiential division that launched at the beginning of the year, which we've pivoted to near complete virtual events now for the time being. We have LOL Audio, which we're ramping up significantly. And then LOL Network, which is our broader sort of, distribution footprint. And across all of those, I think interactivity and context is really important. One of the areas that we're doubling down on our side is animation, not just because there's a demand for it with third parties. We've seen, sort of traction with earlier tests that we've done even via social, but also it gives us an opportunity where if we're looking at, another shutdown in the US because of flu season or, another wave, and, God forbid, that we still have a content pipeline. We're also looking and are really proud of what we've done on the virtual production side. And so I think what everyone has figured out and what we definitely have committed to is having a really nimble production approach. So when we can be in studio and on set, we will be. We want to do as much as we can to produce virtually. And then with the IP that we're developing, even before COVID, it was always on the pipeline to look into interactive gaming and experiences around, many of the popular series and IP that resonate with our audiences.
So you mentioned animation as one of the things that you're looking into. Clearly, that's something a little bit easier to produce in a time of quarantine and lockdowns and other things. I know Netflix is also looking into animation, trying to catch Disney as that, the number one provider of that worldwide. I want to bring up a clip from Reed Hastings from the interview. He was talking about streaming. And I think when we talk about streaming a lot, we think about binge watching. You're consuming a lot of content all at once. But he actually made the point that YouTube sees about 7 times more hours viewed than Netflix. Let's hear him talk about that a little bit.
There's a lot of people on the internet who like entertainment, and we're serving a small fraction of them. So we try to focus on the big picture, which is We want everyone on the internet to have a chance to have Netflix, like they do YouTube. Frankly, YouTube is the one that's quite far ahead of us, both in reach and in total hours. They get about 7 times more viewing than Netflix does. So we got a long way to go.
So LOL Network is all over YouTube. I'm curious, what do you see in terms of engagement there? We've talked about the streaming wars heating up, but you're already in the spot where Reed Hastings is saying that's where the eyeballs are. What do you see in terms of engagement now, and where do you think that's going in the future?
So, his insight is spot on. Netflix is a market leader for a reason. And I love that he's not so narrowly defining what competition looks like, because if you're delivering media, any media platform, even if you're delivering video and someone's listening audio, we're in an attention economy. So if there is another platform, another piece of content vying for the audience's attention, then you're in direct competition with them. And I think as much as we all predicted cord cutting, or we thought, okay, well, maybe mobile consumption is going to drop off of a cliff because folks aren't in transit as much, the answer really is sort of like all of the above. Like where are consumers watching? It's everywhere, but the caveat is depending on the context of what they're doing at the time. So I always, when we're looking through stats and studies, we try to take a step back and just say, not to be so insular with focus groups of one, but to do a gut check on what am I as a consumer is doing. And that's why it's important in the composition of our companies to make sure that, in addition to focusing on first party and third party research, that you really have sort of diverse representation, not just culturally, but even from sort of an age skew perspective and a life stage perspective, right? Your consumption habits are going to be very different. If you have children, if you don't have children, I can attest to that. And so our approach and our response to that, we think the future is all of the above. And so, to the degree that we can, are aiming to be everywhere the audience is, which is why we know our audience is listening to podcasts. We have a channel on Sirius XM, and even though folks aren't in their cars, they're still tuning in, right? Because they're looking to diversify their media experience. Think about yourself being, stuck in the house all day, right? Like you need information and entertainment at different times in different ways, depending on what you're engaged in at the time. And I don't foresee that changing dramatically. How we allocate our time and invest that time across media will change as the world opens it back up. But the diversification of the way that we are consuming, I think will remain steady.
And we're consuming live video shows now too, just like right now. So I want to say hello to some of the people in the stream who are joining us. More members. We have Sharon from Toronto, Brenda from Louisiana, Latasha from Houston, and Kathy also from New York City. Thank you for joining us. Ty, you were just talking to us about the attention economy, about where marketing dollars are going. I know you have a deep marketing background. I'm curious about that now. Something like Netflix Tiger King broke the internet a few months back. It's the small, low-budget doc. It's released with zero fanfare. How are you at LOL Network and other media companies reevaluating marketing strategies when things like that can be the next big thing?
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it really is contextual, right? So it depends on, what we're rolling out and when. We just partnered recently with Quibi on a series that Kevin started called Die Hart. And there was a ton of heavy social promotion regarding that because, we knew that we would reach, in partnership with Quibi, we would reach users in feed, and they would be often consuming on phone, and then or ultimately, casting, to one of their devices. However, one of our biggest shows on across our network is Cold as Balls, and we actually create dynamic versions of the show so that they're contextual for the context in which they're being consumed. So the series exists as a 2-minute with additional sort of like context and information and tips. So it's a 2 to 3 minute series on Snapchat. It's, the runtime is usually 11 minutes on YouTube, and at Facebook, where the consumption is different, we do a version of the show called Cold Cuts, where you get right down to the meat of the episode, because we know that we have a shorter time to grab a consumer and feed. So it's been dynamic, but I will say in terms of, in that media investment. So when we're investing in paid advertising now, we do have to look at where the audience is spending. And I think everyone is cash conscious in this economy. So, I know that our our brand partners and advertisers are thinking, really carefully and trying to shore up resources depending on what's ahead of the curve. And in that regard, we just try to focus on value creation when we're dealing and partnering with brands and advertisers. And I don't think that's changed. I just think what represents value and what the value proposition is might just look very different now. So there's one way to insert a brand message in content. If you're in a live studio, it might look very different if you're producing something virtually. And there's some great technology that's allowed us that we're exploring to actually insert brand messages more dynamically into content.
That's great. I have a question here in the stream from Steven. He wants to know, what advice do you have for amateur filmmakers trying to build an audience?
So, I think the barrier to entry, right, to audience has never been lower. So, if you look at Sarah Cooper is a great example of, a comedian who reached her audience, with impersonations via social, and now has, major deals across different media platforms. Again, in the attention economy, even if you're an amateur, it's hard to break through. It's a crowded marketplace, but your ability to get in and to make noise and to provide value to that audience, I think it's never been easier. But to get on those platforms and to reach people, but you just have to make sure that you have something very resonant to break through. And the other piece I would say is, no matter if you're a filmmaker or if you're trying to get into the business, on the executive side, it is important to, it's no more that you can graduate with an MBA or an MFA and be armed for your long-term career. I feel like all of us are in school all the time. We're constantly having to study the consumer. We're constantly having to study the technology, and we're constantly having to brush up on the landscape. So I would just say, always be learning and learning all aspects of the business. Understand what's going into green light decisions. Understand what the distribution context looks like. Think about, when you had a film before, ultimately you want to see it on the big screen, right? You're thinking a theatrical debut is the be all end all. That may not be the case right now. So think about, when you're creating, think in mind about what platforms you're creating for.
So keeping on the subject of breaking into the industry, we talked earlier about diversity of content, but I'm also interested in just diversity generally. You're talking about getting in, getting a meeting with a certain person. A lot of times we see networks that kind of look alike tend to attract more people that look the same way. Earlier, when Dan Roth sat down with Netflix co-CEO Reed Hastings, Hastings talked about a tradition of success of Black representation in entertainment. Let's take a listen to that, and then I want to get your take on that.
There's some fields like Silicon Valley software where Black Americans are underrepresented. But in entertainment, there's been a long tradition of success. And we've got a wide variety of Black content and stronger directors. There's some studies coming out showing basically how strong Netflix is in all those dimensions. So in terms of entertainment, we've just really followed what's great storytelling. And like Ava DuVernay did some great stories for us with 13th, the documentary about mass incarceration, When They See Us. Kenya Barris just did a series, Black AF, that's incredibly funny. And then we've got, great family entertainment like Raising Dion, young Black kid who's got a superpower and learning how to use it. So think of our programming as super diverse, multiple dimensions. And that's been a long-term focus, not of just this year.
So Hastings there talking about some of Netflix diverse programming. I know LOL Network is really big on diverse voices. What do you think about those statements? Do you agree? Is the entertainment field diverse enough?
Well, I think Netflix is doing a great job on the diversity map. And I think it's because, by design, they've been very deliberate, right, about supporting, not just Black creators, but creators of all different backgrounds. Was so excited to see the appointment of, Bazoma St. John to the CMO slot there. And so I think from the boardroom to the, sort of the boardroom to behind the camera to, screenwriters, they've done a really great job of amplifying Black voices. I do not think, though, that is representative right now of the broader industry, unfortunately. I do think with, all of the what I call this racial reckoning that's happened, during COVID. There's much more attention, but my hope is that this isn't just a moment for the industry and it's actually a movement. At LOL, and it's interesting because I've had a lot of conversations, over the course of the summer about what our stance is on diversity. We're just diverse by design, so we don't really have a stance on diversity. It's a company that's Black owned. The executive ranks are very diverse from sort of a all over from a cultural perspective. We support diverse voices. We have one stand-up franchise where, there are comedians from over 30 countries, represented. And so comedy and color is not an initiative for us. It's a founding principle. It's our entire strategy. And so, and I think that happens when, yes, that, we put a line in the sand and said, we're essentially, filling a hole in the marketplace. We found a white space in comedy. We're filling it with brown faces. But it also is a direct reflection of what the leadership looks like. You're right. In any industry, like attracts like. So if you want to change what shows up on the screen, you have to change, I believe, very strongly what your boardroom looks like, what your C-suite looks like. Internship, mentorship initiatives are great, but who's making the decisions, who's allocating the dollars? Those are the folks that's where we have to become more diverse. And by design, then the entire sort of supply chain will become more diverse.
I love that idea that this isn't a moment, but a movement. I'm wondering maybe this increased demand you were talking about earlier can lead to some of these audiences getting more of what they want to see on the screen. I'm curious, talk to us about Sugarberry for a minute, because I know that that's a group that you're talking to that isn't served very well right now. Can you tell us about what you're doing with that company?
Same, Sugarberry is a company that I co-founded with actress and producer Tika Sumpter. And it was actually her brainchild. She was pregnant, looking for resources, and said, hey, the images and all of the representation around Black motherhood is very doom and gloom. We deserve some sweetness too. And so it resonated with me so deeply as a consumer. And then when the deeper I dug into the immense purchasing power and influence of this audience to which I belong, it seemed a no-brainer that no one was serving this group. And so, we launched right at the height of the pandemic. So right at the shutdown is when we launched. So I'd like to say we're not just a digitally native brand, we're kind of a remote native brand because we've done everything from a distance. But it's a real passion for us, and the response has been incredible so far.
Ty, thank you so much for joining us on the show today and sharing these thoughts on the future of entertainment, and best of luck to you with Sugarberry as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Susie. Have a great one.
You too. That was Ty Randolph. She is the EVP and GM at Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud Network and the co-founder of Sugarberry, a media company for brown moms. We were asking you throughout the show today to weigh in on our poll from the LinkedIn news team. We were asking today whether or not you think that you would return to movie theaters once they start to open again in your region. We see a lot of you, overwhelming number, 66% saying, no, I'll stick to streaming. We heard no's from Jeanette, Michael, Michaela, Trisha, Dolores, and Pamela, saying that she's streaming on the couch until the pandemic environment becomes a healthier way of living. We had yeses, though, from Bala and Gary, and some others said maybe. Joyce and Eric said maybe next summer. Thank you for voting in the poll today from the LinkedIn news team. Tomorrow on Business Unusual, I will be back to talk about businesses that rely on live sports. It's the NFL season kickoff, and we're going to be speaking with LinkedIn editor Joe Millord and the CEO of Sodexo's North American Sports and Leisure business, Steve Pangburn. We're going to talk about what it's like when a stadium needs fans to come and eat and dine and whatnot, and what that means for your business when those things have been so uncertain throughout the pandemic. Thank you for joining us on Business Unusual. We are live here from the LinkedIn news page every day at noon Eastern. I'm Susie Jackson. I'll see you tomorrow.